I'm very glad to introduce Costanza Longanesi Cattani, who was a research assistant to Kapwani on this project and played an invaluable role in bringing this project together. She's invited here as our last moderator for the closing remarks. I want to take also a minute to say, unfortunately, I have to leave to the airport immediately, but I want to say how special the last 2 days have been for me. Thank you, Kapwani and Gaetan, for thinking about this, for bringing all of us here together. Thank you for bringing me into the project and trusting me to work alongside you. I will be forever grateful to the both of you. Thank you to the National Gallery. Thank you to the Wexner Center for the Arts. Thank you to our amazing host, Ocean Space, for this space and the amazing program also that they do here in Venice. I want to thank all of the speakers for accepting to share their research with all of us. I have learned so much over the past 2 days, and these thoughts will continue to percolate with me for a very, very long time. Thank you to everyone who joined, for your curiosity, for engaging with these different themes, these different threads that we've been discussing, and I hope that it's been as an experience as enjoyable for you as it's been for me. So I'm going to pass the mic now to Costanza with Emily and Dionne, who will be discussing some of the sort of takeaways of the past 2 days, and I wish I could participate, but sadly I really have to run. So thank you to everybody. Yes, thank you.
Hello. Thank you, Anaïs, for the introduction and for your amazing work. It was a pleasure to work with you as well. So good morning, everyone. We have now reached the final session of our closing remarks. My name is Costanza Longanesi Cattani, and I will be moderating this discussion. But before, I will briefly introduce my research, and I would like to thank Kapwani and Gaetan for inviting me to do so. I had the privilege of serving as Kapwani's Venice-based research assistant, and I must confess that before delving into the research, as many Venetians, I was not aware of the historical significance of the Conterie. Objects that I see on a daily basis, and sometimes I even wear. And thanks to Kapwani's trinket and to the National Gallery of Canada, who gave me this opportunity, I have come to appreciate the hidden history encapsulated in these small objects, which are scattered across the globe and that transcend time, space, and cultures. And yet their history is mostly unknown to Venetian even today. It's particularly meaningful that this symposium is happening here in Venice. So my role primarily involved researching the Venice-related history of the Conterie, whereas Mojan was focusing on the Canada-related sources. This included compiling articles on the subject, an Italian bibliography, selecting primary Venetian sources, and accessing the Venetian archives, as well as the Museo del Vetro di Murano. Additionally, engaged with the leading scholars in the field and translated their research from Italian to English, or sometimes Venetian to English. Our research unfolded in three main directions: the history of Conterie, their trade, and their value. We found that the invention of Conterie was intrinsically linked to the history of the development of the techniques in Murano, the technological advancements, and the chemical experiments. Over time, these beads evolved from being round, thick, and chunky to smaller and smaller, or more complex, more multi-layered, colorful. The combination of shape and color gave endless results, and so are the names of the Venetian beads. And funny enough, we discovered that this name stayed in Venice. During their journey through the Atlantic, they lost their original name and acquired a new commercial name, as well as a new purpose, a new use, and a new meaning. For example, we talked a lot about chevron beads during this past 2 days, and this in Venice are called rosetta beads, as well as the white hearts, which are the cornaline d'Aleppo. The second phase of our research involved studying the trade of conterie and their roots. So Venetians did not trade directly. In the 15th century, they sold to the European colonial powers, England, Portugal, the Netherlands, Spain, and France. Our important goal was to compile a list of what materials were exchanged for the conterie. And I'll read it to you, the list. Enslaved people: gold, ivory, precious stones, monkeys, parrots, pepper, incense, tobacco, sugar, cocoa, colored woods, pelts, furs, and palm oil. Some of these materials can be found inside the pavilion, the Canada Pavilion. So our research brought us to a vast amount of Venetian sources on the slave trade and led to the discoveries of the letters of Cesare Vignola, the Venetian ambassador in London, residente veneziano, from 1764 to 1768. These letters revealed how he established an important trade with the Davenport Company known as the Liverpool Slave House, which contributed to the fortune of the industry of conterie in Murano. The value of conterie, understanding their economic value in a sense of barter value, was very complex due to scarcity of Venetian and Italian sources, explicit sources. Thanks to Karin Palaver, we learned how the conterie were used as beads. The beads were used as currencies, as well as the conterie in Africa. However, we did find two equivalences, two equations that I would like to mention. On the Dictionnaire universel du commerce by the brothers Savary, dated 1723, it states under the word conterie that 1,500 kilos of beads of the right color and size would buy 612 male adults in Angola. Another economic equation was found in the Hudson Bay Company price list, which is a company in Canada, a fur trading business. And to buy one pelt of beaver, you need to, the price is half a pound of beads of conterie. Okay, and I finish. We have now reached the final session of this 2 days. I would say 2 days because the discussion started the moment we met on Wednesday, and all these different ideas and perspective on beads, we couldn't stop talking. We started the moment we met, and we continued while we were walking in the streets of Venice and on the way to get a glass of water. It is incredible how there is so much knowledge on the same object and yet so many different perspectives. I would like to introduce the moderators and thank them for their work. Dionne Edwards, Head of Learning and Public Practice at the Wexner Center, and Emily Haidet, Curator of Public Programs in the Department of Learning and Public Practice at the Wexner Center. And I would like to ask them also there are so many new faces to sum up and tell us a bit of what they think during their session was the key takeaways. And also we would like to include the public in this conversation, as there are many questions that came up during these days, and we would like to hear what struck you and what are your takeaways from this 2 days.
Thank you. So we had a panel with Karen Poliver, with Alexandra Nawagaubao, and with Denise Ferreira da Silva, and we had who have quite a range in terms of their research. Instead of attempting to sort of summarize, I'm maybe going to sort of speak to some of the things that I noted and things that I'm still thinking about. You mentioned these beads as symbols of power, as Karen Poliver talked about being both ornamental or as ornaments, but then also very much as currency, very much as a part of the market and even determining the market. Karen Poliver talked about these tensions when coins entered the market, how beads had really positioned themselves in the market and had great power in the market, and then tensions developed as coins began to be introduced. But we talked a lot about early on ideas around beads, the glass beads being rare, but then early on sort of people maybe not understanding their value. Our whole conversation was about value, and thinking a lot about value, and Denise Ferreira da Silva really pushed us to question value in many, many ways. Questions such as who gets to even ask the questions about value, who gets to make determinations of value, who gets to feel valued or embody value. There's a quote that I'm still thinking about that Denise said, life carries the highest value. And so I'm still really thinking about that. But these equations, this kind of deconstructing that Da Silva took us through, with numbers and thinking about equations, thinking about additions, subtractions, thinking about voids, and really sort of undoing ideas, whatever maybe ideas that I'll speak for myself, whatever ideas I might have come here with, or understandings of value. Da Silva really began to sort of undo much of that for me, and has me questioning so much around these ideas. We talked a little bit about questions inside of questions, and hold ideas of value and wonder about its meaning. And so I'm very much even just wondering about the meaning of value. Value cannot, Da Silva talked about, value cannot simply or only belong to a thing or an event. And so really this undoing of an understanding of value, I appreciate it. And then we heard from Nawagaubao, and Alexander really sort of started with a story, a really important story, this idea of life, the home, maybe a domestic space, and then an other space. We might think of it as a space beyond. Maybe the space might encompass a marketplace. Maybe the space might encompass nature or something beyond. But there's this space beyond the home, and Alexander told about the coming and going, the back and forth of going from maybe a domestic space or a lived-in space, and then going out into a world, and then bringing back. Very much talked about relationship, this idea of relationship, this idea of reciprocity. But what I appreciate about Alexandra is this reminder of sort of indigenous knowing, indigenous life, indigenous ways of being and understanding, the spiritual realm, cosmologies, and in that knowing and living, there's this reclamation and naming new uses of materials. So Alexandra described the beads, these glass beads, as little spirit berries that are life-giving. I will not forget that's a beautiful image. Little spirit berries, and these berries being life-giving, these beads being life-giving. That begins to sort of take this, what seems inanimate, it animates it in a kind of way. There's a kind of breath, there's a kind of being, which I found to be quite powerful. Alexandra also spoke to color and the significance of color, ideas of and resonance of color. So the color of beads, blue in particular, was a color that she spoke to. So and very much the conversation with Nawagawa was around indigenous systems and ways of life, and I appreciated being situated in that context and thinking about the beads in that context. So I'll stop there.
If it's very interesting, both the spiritual, how it kind of put together all the conversations.
Yeah.
Also with Karen Palaver saying that beads had two purposes: the currency one, which was very low, and the spiritual one in Africa that was very high.
That's right.
And Emily, would you like to give us some takeaways from your session?
Sure. I hope most of you were here for that, so I won't go into too much detail of the specifics of what Mabel O. Wilson and Pierre Nicolo Sofia shared. But what I do want to mention is this notion of questioning that Dionne brought up, the questioning of what is the known value of something, what is the known history, how do we know, where do we know what we know, how do we know that, what is invisible, what's hidden. And I think, it came up in the research methods that Mabel and Pierre spoke to, image analysis, digging into these documents and archives, but also in the objects themselves. It came up that in other conversations that these objects hold so much power. They're imbued with power and meaning. And I think thinking through the power and the representation that these archives and these objects hold, and the lack of representation that some of these people, these objects may have, is really evident of who holds the power, right? And I think that's kind of my takeaway. It's just thinking through these systems. I have way more questions than I have answers. But I'm grateful to be part of all these conversations.
I want to see if I can find this quote from Mabel around power, because Emily, it strikes me, your discussion around power, how Mabel spoke to, it is very much about power. It is very much about positioning. One takes a position, right? One takes some sort of power position, and actually anyone can inhabit or perform these power constructs. So any of these constructs that we may be considering and saying, so here's this way of sort of showing up in a system, here's this way of sort of forwarding a system, anyone actually can embody that and perform that. So that's definitely what I'm left thinking about from that session in particular.
Also, maybe the value of sources. They talked a lot about written sources, but also we've been talking about oral stories, the narratives, and where is the value as a proof of the past, of what we've been hearing. We heard Vinicius telling us stories, and those are in the context of this symposium are as important sometimes as sources in the archives to bring us the real meaning.
Oh my goodness, Royce Young Wolf story, right? And sort of that embodiment, storying, this kind of lived story, and that these beads, these objects could be, they were imbued by the maker, they could be deconstructed, they could be reconstructed, reformed, reimagined. I'm thinking so much about not only the object having the ability to do that, but a being having the ability to do that, and sort of how object and being might not be so clear as I walk away from the symposium, sort of the clarity of sort of object and being and living what has life. I'm questioning all of that.
As Caroline and Anaïs are not present, maybe we can say a few words on their sessions. During Caroline Cochling session, moderated session, Royce gave us wonderful sang for us, and we're very grateful for that unforgettable moment. And as you just mentioned, she explained how Venetian beads are crushed by Native Americans and made as blue clouds beads, and how it is not the prestige of the material, but the maker that gives spiritual meaning to the object. Yeah. And Michael highlighted how we should question maybe our the history that we've been told at school, and how it needs to be rewritten, and through visual analysis of the sources that we are given, and these questions should be a lot of about the environment has come up as well during these days a couple of times, which in this space makes a lot of sense. Yes, his question says to question the meaning of your iPhone and like the materials taken by the earth. So even the materials that we have today in our hands have a meaning. Where do they come from?
Something that is sticking with me from that session is something that Royce said about not just, there is the questioning, but it's also just belief. Yeah. Belief in what other people are saying. It's not what this person, it's not saying, well, Dionne says da-da-da-da. It's taking what Dionne is saying as truth. And rather than saying, someone says this object is imbued with something, you say, no, this object is imbued with something. And I think that's something that is about connection and relationship, and can only enhance understanding. It's the trust and belief. And I think that's something I'm taking away from this too.
Very much indigenous ways of knowing, and what I'd like to also think about as ways of knowing, right? Maybe outside of the academy, these other ways of knowing outside of sort of certain constructed sort of spaces for learning, sort of other ways of knowing something. I appreciate what Royce also said about sort of what puts an object into perspective, into being. The material always has potential. The object always has potential, which I find to be a kind of force, right? There's a kind of force with that, a kind of movement with that. There's a kind of thread that I'm finding between something that Royce Young Wolf said, the land has memory just as materials have memory. Michael spoke about, Propakov spoke about the sort of raised the quote, the Derek Walcott quote, the sea is history. And then Pierre said the ocean is a system. So I'm pulling through all of these ideas, land and water, and sort of thinking about systems, thinking about depth, thinking about life, passage. We've talked about movement. We've talked about migration. But very much all three of them had these really specific quotes. And I'm thinking about, well, what's the memory? What's the memory in the Atlantic, right? Mabel talked so much about the transatlantic slave trade and sort of what happened in the Americas. But I'm very much thinking about that stretch, that body of water, and the memories in that water, but also very much thinking about the land that Royce also spoke to, and what are the memories and the depth of that.
I think we've spoken enough. Maybe we can ask if there is someone who wants to share their takeaways from the session.
So we'd love if you would think about what you're still thinking about. We've had a couple of days together. Some of you are just joining us. Others have been with us the past couple of days. And so we're really interested in not answering your questions, but just raising the questions. We'd love to write down your questions. We'd like to take your questions home with us. Your resonance, what's resonating with you? What do you remember? What might we take away? And after we hear from people, we'll all have a collective of things that we might take away and continue to think about. So that maybe will be rich for us, a way of kind of ending this symposium with very sort of rich resonance. So,
and we can remind Dionne that it is being recorded, so we literally are taking it away, and we will be able to. I hope that's okay. Maybe you don't want to say anything about it, but I just mean it because actually it's a record that we will be able to think, and I know I'll be reflecting back on a lot of these sessions. I don't have to go far because Karen has a reflection.
I'm going to give some context for this comment, which will be brief, which is I came in April, which we've talked, many of us, about the power of Gaetan, making you go places you otherwise wouldn't, because opening week at Venice is not something I ever wanted to do. It's crazy busy and doesn't necessarily mean you get to see the art. But in being here and getting to experience in the few days, feeling the Global South really was and is present, that the Global South really took over this thing that is the Venice Biennale, that is, internationally renowned as the thing for contemporary art biennially. Being here and hearing these conversations, for me, really underscored how Kapwani's research was also about the Global South. That the power of this idea of trinket and of these beads, like to hear from people literally all over the world about how the power of this object in its currency, in its beauty, in its representation, in its impact on the Global South. Because if you think about the currency part of it and its connection to the forced migration of Africans into the Americans and their forced labor, which in turn created, along with the stolen indigenous land, the modern-day capitalist system, that just has blown my mind. I went to bed like, what? So for me, it's just the power of this seeming small thing and the humongous impact. And for me, I'd have to congratulate her on her brilliance and her insight and her. It's always amazing to have an artist who wants to peel back a layer and the next layer and the next layer. So I'm glad this is being recorded, because for what we do at Band, focusing on emerging Black artists in their early career and early curators in their early start of their practice, like this is study 101 to watch this video back. If I could have teleported them all here, I would have, but I have that kind of money. If you have that kind of money, you want to throw it our way, please do. It's being recorded. I have to put that out there. But yeah, I just applaud. Like, I'm leaving with going to Jamaica in a couple of weeks and talking to my aunt about this amazing woman who talked about mahogany And I'm just like, my mind's blown. So just congratulations on how, for me, this symposium not only gave context to Kapwani's work, but it really underscored the theme of this Biennale, which was supposed to be how the Global South was centered.
So from the first panel, thank you all, by the way. From the first panel, I think my initial reaction was when I walked into the space, I felt everything that was being talked about before I heard about it. I didn't know how to articulate it, but you all gave it language, and you gave it something tangible for me to recognize what I was feeling when I came into that space. And so I really appreciated the panel yesterday with Michael and Royce. Yeah. And the dichotomy between like having a somatic experience, like spiritually, and also like having an intellectual experience, because I felt that throughout the experience. My last nugget is that, I teach my students about visual racial literacy and racial iconography, and never really thought about materials as a kind of racial iconography, or having like this depth of just racial historiography. I guess that's the word I want to use. But being able to now take that into my classroom in this different kind of way, because we usually just look at images, but not actually materials, and just, knowing the depth of that has really pushed me. And so I appreciate that new language, that new area of study to interrogate and also present to people who need that literacy. Because when I walked into that space and had that somatic experience, I think that's based on a literacy around like engaging with the arts. And so I think that's important to teach my students and, be able to share that with them. So thank you to the artists and everybody who's involved.
So I too learned a lot at this conference. Really appreciated all of the talks, and also learned a lot at the pavilion. The image of beads on strings still stays with me. And in Karen Palliver's talk yesterday, she mentioned that the etymology of Contreras is not just ornament, but also to count. So one of the questions that I'm left with at the end of the conference is the relationship between the beads on strings and the abacus, which is an old age method of counting and currency.
Do you have like?
Again, Mazgirat so much that you all have shared. It is such a pleasure to be amongst such open minds and expressions. I was quickly trying to take photos of the map you showed, kind of the graph of material composition of the different types of beads. And I'm walking away with, I think, years of research that I want to do in actually looking at not just the composition and the alchemy of it, but the extraction and the flow of that extraction and exchange. I kept, having these flashes of images of Chnupa Hanska Lugar's work about buffaloes and the decimation of buffaloes that altered drastically the North American continent. But I had no idea the connection of pigment from buffalo bones, bone black, and the surplus of that has now is living in many of the European portraits, the paintings, is the ancestors of buffaloes have created those works. And I think there's something deeply moving about understanding the science and the composition and the location and extraction of all of those materials to create those single, whether drawn or wrapped beads that now circulate the world. So yeah, the inspiration from this whole session, I really want to see the depths of that alchemy and kind of the structure. And I want to collaborate with more of you here. I will be emailing you because I don't read Italian. I can't add 5 more languages onto my work in my lifetime, I think, to really pull it out. So thank you all for so much that you've given with your languages and your knowledge and your access points, because also I can't be here in Venice, and this is such a beautiful opportunity. So, Mazgarat, thank you all.